Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Patch 3.25 had one of the biggest economic overhauls in terms of game systems Path of Exile's ever seen. The only one that I would argue was bigger was the introduction of loot filters way back in Path of Exile's Dark Ages. The introduction of Faustus' currency exchange allows players to circumvent a whole bunch of the things that required you to go outside the game client in order to conduct various trades. In theory, this means transactions are a lot smoother than they'd be before, and with lower friction in trading generally comes more extreme price shifts. However, this league has been interesting in that while Faustus has certainly had some effect on the league economy, the Kingsmarch mechanics have had a bigger one. I wanted to put together a video that outlines the way that this trade league economy is shaking up. I did just want to put in one piece of general advice though for players who haven't really been playing much in 3.25. Maybe you're a lapsed POE player thinking, oh yeah, now I'll come back and check things out now that we've got this currency exchange and it seems to be working well and the sky isn't falling down and cats and dogs aren't living together, anything like that. If you're in that category, what I would suggest you do in order to get yourself a turbo start in patch 3.25 is simple enough. You want to farm a particular boss, and that is Catarina, the master of the syndicate, and you want to do that until she drops a veiled orb. This seems to be about a 25 to 30% drop rate. The community is not exactly certain on this, but the reason you want to do this is that it's one of those bosses that you can beat without a particularly powerful character, and once you've got yourself a veiled orb, it's almost at the moment a 1-for-1 trade for the unique belt Headhunter. Once you've got yourself a Headhunter, which will cost you about a veiled orb and 2 or so divine orbs, then at that point you'll be able to efficiently farm tier 16 maps, and you can limp your way through tier 17s if you want to experience that content. And when I say limp through tier 17s, I mean that you won't be clearing them smoothly and fast, and you might have some real trouble with the map bosses, but you will at least be able to experience that content because Headhunter is pretty good at carrying a lot of different builds. Anyways, late starter advice out of the way, let's talk about how this league differs from previous trade league economies. The most significant thing that I think will stand out to many players is that Mirrors of Kalandra are cheaper than they've been in previous leagues. They're still the most expensive currency item by a long way, but currently they're trading for in the high 600s of divine orbs. Normally at this point in a league, we might be looking at high 700s at the lowest, but probably in the 8s or even the 9s, and conceivably even over the 1,000 barrier. What's going on here? Why is the Mirror of Kalandra cheaper than it's been in previous leagues? Well, I would argue that the main thing here is that players have largely solved Kingsmarch shipping. And what Kingsmarch shipping does is it is extremely generous when it comes to giving out mirror shards. It doesn't give you mirror shards if you engage with the mechanic on a casual basis. You really do need to min-max it in order to get this. If you've got 18 rank 10 farmers, which is quite an ordeal to get, you'll then be able to save up all of your shipping goods for an entire week and send them off in conjunction with more than 20 million Thaumaturgic dust. We'll come to the effects of Thaumaturgic dust later. And when you do this, you'll have a 50 million shipment. These seem to average about 2.5 mirror shards, according to research done by Ziggy D. I'm not certain it's exactly 2.5, and there are definitely confirmed instances of getting anything from 0 through to 7, but 2.5 seems to be an approximate average for the number of shards you'll get back. What this means is that every veteran player is generating 1 raw Mirror of Kalandra per 8 of these shipments that get sent out. This is more Mirrors of Kalandra than are generated by Powergamers on average in a normal league, and as a result, the supply of Mirrors of Kalandra is higher than it normally is. The other thing though that plays a little bit against this is the question of power runes. Power runes are something that come up very rarely through interacting with the league mechanic. These are extremely in demand because Kalguran runesmithing requires a large number of them. However, the min-maxing strategy that gets you the most mirror shards out of the league mechanic does seem to be a little bit stingier on power runes than some of the less min-max strategies are, and as a result the trade league economy is incentivizing players to sometimes mirror an existing weapon that already has a 13 or 15 power rune enchant on it, rather than trade for a whole bunch of power runes and then craft their own weapon. That's something that's been coming up, and I do think the fact that these two commodities can somewhat substitute for each other in some ways may end up being an ongoing factor in how expensive these become over time. Anyways, back to the league mechanic itself. This league mechanic is very good at giving players Mirrors of Kalandra if you're playing at the top end, and if you're a power gamer, and if you're min-maxing everything about the league mechanic. However, if you're engaging with the league mechanic in a less min-maxed way, you're sending out shipments of 500,000 or 700,000 shipment value or whatever, then in that case, what you're going to be getting is a lot more Divine Orbs than usual. The League mechanic in both of these cases is extremely stingy when it comes to giving you Chaos Orbs. That's one of the reasons that I think Divine Orbs are a bit cheaper than usual. While both the Powergamers and the upper middle class in PoE are getting more direct mirror shards than usual, and hence more mirrors of Calandra than usual, what you might term the rest of the middle class are generating more Divine Orbs than usual as a result of this League mechanic, but the League mechanic is not giving them Chaos Orbs, and that's very important. While this is a bit of a factor in terms of Chaos Orbs being scarcer than they've been in the past though, the main one is Tier 17 maps. Tier 17 maps got nerfed, i.e. made considerably easier to complete than they were in patch 3.24. Where in 3.24 it was only the upper echelon of players that were beating them at all. In 3.25 you've now got a wide swathe of players who are limping through Tier 17s, and on top of that you've got the players who used to be limping through them are now blitzing them. This is really important because it means that Tier 17 maps are being rolled a lot more. And the only thing you can do when you've got a Tier 17 map that has an undesirable mod, one that you can't beat or you're not willing to engage with on it, is apply a Chaos Orb to it. What this means is that the upper middle class and even middle class Path of Exile players are spending a lot more Chaos Orbs than usual, removing them from the League economy, and that's the reason Divine Orbs are trading for less Chaos Orbs than usual. It's not really that Divine Orbs are worse, it's that Chaos Orbs are better than they've been in the past, and that's a huge factor in shaping this League's economy. Other than the removal of quantity farming, this is probably the single biggest change from 3.24 to 3.25. The other huge impact of the League mechanic has been the demand for Thaumaturgic Dust. Let's have a look at Rakiata's Dance. This is the unique item that turns into the most Thaumaturgic Dust out of every item in the game. Rakiata's Dance is trading for about 4 Divine Orbs still. This is an item that has some value as an item that you might want to equip on your character, but overwhelmingly they're being bought to turn into Thaumaturgic Dust. Additionally, Rakiata's Dance is being used in conjunction with the Omen of Fortune, which people often remember as the old Trash to Treasure prophecy. This is primarily being used in order to generate more of the Rakiata's Dance, which then end up getting turned into Thaumaturgic Dust. Of course, you'll be doing this with an influenced version of the base that becomes Rakiata's Dance. Divinarius is another similar example of an item that is unique. It's tier 0 rarity, and so it turns into a huge amount of dust when it's sharded. And whilst it is an item that's good enough to equip, most people aren't interested in equipping it. Instead, what they're interested in doing with it is turning it into that juicy, juicy dust. Essentially, every unique item is having a price floor put on it by the ability for it to be turned into Thaumaturgic Dust, at least those unique items that are tier 3 and rarer. But this effect is most pronounced on tier 0 and tier 1 rarity uniques, where those items that will shard for 250,000 dust or more in many cases, they end up being worth a meaningful amount. What the shipments are allowing you to do is turn 25 million-ish of shipping value worth of crops and 25 million-ish of dust into a couple of mirror shards each time you do it, and this has meant that there's a lot of demand for some of these unique items that otherwise might get equipped, but not by all that many people. And this becomes more obvious when we're looking at an item like Essentia Sanguis, which people aren't really that interested in equipping because this item is fairly bad, even though it is tier 0 rarity. The next thing I want to bring up is how Heist is looking in this league, because Heist is in a really weird place in patch 3.25. Essentially, Heist is all about 4 jackpot items only. Focus Amulet, Simplex Amulet, Helical Ring, and to a lesser extent now, Replica Elbron's Warpath. And one very important warning here, the prices that you see when you look at this base types page on PoE Ninja is actually the price for ones that are mirrored or that are otherwise bricked. So keep in mind that they'll be quite a lot more expensive if you're looking for one that is unbricked, and especially if you want one that is unsplit and unbricked for any of these bases. Of course, Replica Elbron's Warpath does not have these considerations. These items are worth so much more than anything else you'll pull out of Heist that it's not funny. The other thing that's important with Heist is that Heist is not very good at generating gold, and as a result it doesn't play well with any of the big shipment based strategies. For that reason, a lot of people aren't interested in running Heist. However, in 3.25 you usually want to have all 5 of your Scarab slots be aligned to one particular thing on the Atlas. And so let's say that you choose strongboxes there. So you spec all of the strongboxes on the Atlas, and then you've got a whole lot of points left over. People tend to take shrines next, But then the next thing you might take after that is likely to be Heist, because Heist is something where the in-map events take a very small amount of time. What this means is that there's less people than usual interested in running Heist content, but there's more people than usual generating Heist content. And so everything that you find in maps that is used up by Heisters is in pretty low demand at the moment, and the Heisters themselves are really just looking for Focused Amulet, Simplex Amulet, Helical Ring, Replica Elbron's Warpath, and a couple of other uniques that turn into a large amount of dust. That's really about it this league. The other thing I wanted to take a quick look at is some of the esoteric currency, and I want to start with Hinekora's locks. Hinekora's locks are getting more and more expensive, but especially when you compare them against the mirror. Normally speaking, in previous leagues, Hina locks have been something like 10 or 12 against the mirror. There's a bit of variance on that, but this league, we're looking more like 5, and I wouldn't be surprised if that even goes further than it is now. There's a few reasons for this. The first one is that Hina locks have a ridiculously OP synergy that most people don't think is going to continue into the future with the Reflecting Mist. What that is that the Reflecting Mist, this is the itemized version, the one that you can submit an item to, the Reflecting Mist is counted as a currency for purposes of Hina locks. And so you can have a look at what's going to come out of it. And remember when you're doing this, that when you use the Reflecting Mist, you actually get both versions of it. If you do commit to using the Reflecting Mist through the Hinekora's lock, then you will end up with both copies, the one that's shown as the Hinekora lock foreseeing, and also its inversion. So if you were to take, say, a Simplex Amulet and have a look at what you got if you reflected it, and it was something that looked really juicy, but it was all negative, then you would know that the Reflecting Mist would also give you the positive copy of it, and therefore you should probably commit to that. So as far as esoteric currencies go, Hinekora's locks are way higher than people expected, and Reflecting Mist actually probably a bit lower than I would have expected them to be. They're just that bit more common, and Hinekora's locks are the thing that is limiting those sorts of crafts, at least the ridiculous ones. Finally though, while we're looking at esoteric currencies, the Awakener's Orb is way more expensive than it's been in any recent league. This is important to know because if you're someone who likes Cirrus, I'm sure that if this video gets watched by 25,000 people, I'm sure that 3 or 4 of you enjoy the Cirrus fight. But if you are in that category, this is a very good opportunity for you to go and farm some Cirrus, have some fun, because no one else who's fighting that boss is going to have fun, and while you're doing so, get yourself Awakener's Orbs that will then sell pretty well. Additionally, all of the Elderslayer Exalts are quite a bit more expensive than they've been in recent times. So that's something also to keep in mind, that there's a lot of interest in these esoteric currencies as well. And the final thing I wanted to point out, this is something that surprised me quite a bit. We were talking before about how this league's mechanic is very stingy on Chaos Orbs, very generous with Divine Orbs and Mirror Shards. But in addition, one thing that I thought might turn that around a little bit and that hasn't, is that it is actually very strong to use Divine Orbs in order to prepare items for the Recombinator through the use of Multimod. There's a number of shenanigans about this. I did a video on it when the discoveries were posted to Reddit. Anyways, it's definitely the case that this has not been enough to arrest the downturn in the value of the Divine Orb. Even though there's been a slight uptick in the last day or so, the Divine Orb is definitely on its way down, and it wouldn't surprise me if it ends up crossing down not just under 100 Chaos, but maybe even gets to 90 or so. Divine Orbs are only 48 times rarer than Chaos Orbs, but they have so much more utility that normally they end up trading for a lot more than that. Be interesting to see exactly where it all settles this league, with a league mechanic that gives out a bunch of extra Divines, league mechanic that gives out a bunch of extra Mirror Shards, and also with Recombinators and Tier 17 maps changing around the demand for some of those other currencies. Anyways, that's a whole bunch of thoughts on this league economy, why it's different to usual. The most important takeaway though is that it has not been dominated by Faustus's currency exchange. That's been the thing that's been the best from a user experience perspective, but it hasn't been something that's transformed the way the league is played, and that makes me very confident that it is going to continue to be there into the future of Path of Exile. Gonna leave it there. May your Valorbs have interesting results.